I think one of the big discoveries of lean was that most improvement is bottom up. If you actually look at some of the data we have in that book, but there's a lot of other data, that 80% of your improvement potential is in the heads of your frontline people, or potentially in their heads, and only 20% is with management. So if you manage with spreadsheets and top-down and CBA, you're using your 20% of your engine, not the 80%. So suggestion systems are just an appalling way to tap that 80%. You're probably tapping less than 0.5% of it.
What's up, everybody? This is Paul Critchley, president of New England Lean Consulting, and welcome to yet another episode of the New England Lean podcast. Hope everybody had a great weekend. We got our first snowfall here in New England. Most of us did here in New England last week. Where we are in Connecticut, we only got a couple inches. I'm looking out the window right now, and most of it's gone already, but it made for a very chilly, shortened Halloween night for the kiddos. But we still went off without a hitch, so very thankful for that. This week, we welcome Dr. Alan Robinson to the podcast. Now, I've met Alan a few times. The first time was a few years ago. He spoke at a lean conference that I do workshops for up in Portland, Maine. And I was honestly blown away by what he had to say, stories that he had to tell. And I'll shamefully admit I had heard of Alan before, but I really wasn't that familiar with his work. So after I heard him speak, I kind of looked in and I'm like, whoa, I should have known about this guy a long, long time ago. He's an author, he's an educator, consultant, and a public speaker. He's co-authored or authored, I think, 13 or 14 books. And in the episode, you'll hear he announces he's actually working on yet another one. He's a professor at UMASS Amherst, up in Massachusetts, for the Isenburg School of Management. All his books have been translated into 25 different languages. One he wrote called Corporate Creativity was named Book of the Year by the Academy of Human Resource Management. I mean, in short, the guy knows, he knows what he's talking about. I mean, he's also a consultant, so he works in industry on top of all this other stuff. And he's got some heavy hitter clients: the Fed, GE, Mass Mutual, Danaher, the U.S. Navy, Volkswagen, Toyota. I mean, again, he's done some really interesting, I dare say, groundbreaking research under the umbrella of idea gathering and solicitation from the workforce. So in this episode, we talk a lot about those types of things. He makes a case that lean is really an improvement system that's driven from the bottom up. We also talk a lot about one of my pet peeves, which is, the MBA programs, I think, of the 80s and I'll say some of the 90s really didn't teach anything about it. You don't even have to call it lean, just emotional intelligence, culture, any of that kind of stuff. They didn't really pay attention to the fact that you're going to get most of your improvement from the folks that are working with and for you and that you work with. It was quite honestly a lot about cost benefit analysis, which we talk about at length again in the episode. And, focusing kind of on metrics and the numbers. And that's kind of why I feel like we have some of the issues we do in industry right now. We also, we get off into a little bit of a tangent talking about, can lean work in a large publicly traded organization? And Alan changed my mind. For a long time, having worked at a lot of those places, I kind of was biased and skeptical to think, nope, never going to happen. He gives a lot of good examples of places that have embraced lean and it's working quite well. So I thought that was really interesting. We also talk a little bit about the fact that we can't take such a binary approach to education. And again, he really made me think on this one. As we're young and we have two kids and they're in their school age, we're young. So we think that's their education time. So it's elementary school, middle school, high school, college, maybe you do some postgraduate, and then you air quotes, go to work. But, Alan's kind of saying, well, why is that's kind of stupid? Oh, he doesn't say stupid, but I will. He said, but he makes the case to say education should never really stop. And we do a crummy job as a society in making sure that we keep learning, even through our working time, say between 25 to 65, say. So we talk a lot about that. We also talk about the relationship between lean and leadership and power. And we talk about something I hadn't known much about, but I've since looked into, this thing called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And this is from 1971. So it goes back a ways. And I won't spoil it for you. So Alan breaks it down pretty well. He also brought up a book that came out of that called The Lucifer Effect, and it was by a guy named Philip Zimbardo. Now, he's the guy that actually ran that experiment at Stanford. It's been somewhat challenged, and I'll say debunked, because I think scientifically they made some missteps as far as how they executed the experiment, but it certainly, I think, is relatable. Now, I've watched a documentary about it. I'll link that in the show notes if you're interested. It's really super interesting. And I actually went out and I bought that book. It's on my nightstand right now. I just started reading it, and I'm going to actually try to get Dr. Zimbardo on the podcast after I read it. I want to talk to him about it, but it talks a lot about leadership and how you gain power through doing that and what that does to your psyche and how you end up treating other people. And I think it really, it draws a lot of corollaries between, some of the things that we read online about why lean is challenging sometimes and why it doesn't always necessarily get supported from the top down, because it can challenge the power that those people think that they have. So it was a really, really interesting conversation. This one's a little bit shorter than the last few that I've released. So I think it comes right in around 35, 45 minutes. So it should be a good commute podcast to listen to. And special bonus, we are doing a book giveaway. So one of Alan's, I think his latest book, which was a few years old now, but it's called The Idea-Driven Organization. It's an awesome book. I have read that one. It was moving. It's a lot of aha moments in there. So thanks to Alan for agreeing to do a book giveaway with us. Now, there's some special things you need to do in order to be entered and into that book giveaway. So there's a special hashtag that I reveal at the end of the podcast. So you have to listen to it in order to get that and be entered. And also you have to share. My whole idea with this podcast is to get more people kind of interested in listening to it. Not to make money, because this is not monetized. I do this for me. I do it because I wanted to. But it's important things. I'm passionate about this, and that's why I started doing this. So if you guys can help me and just share the podcast, this episode, it would really help. So I appreciate that. I hope you enjoy this as always, and I hope everybody has a fantastic week, and give it a listen. If you like it, please, take a second, just hit the 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And if you write a review, that'd be extra awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. We'll talk to you later. All right. Welcome to the New England Lean Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Critchley. And today we are joined by Dr. Alan Robinson. Alan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. It's good to see you. We have it. So you and I met, golly, I think a few years ago when you spoke at the Portland Lean Conference up in Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
So that might be 3, maybe 4 years ago?
I've spoken there a few times.
Okay.
But the last time was, 2-3 years ago.
Okay. So we get to chat. We get to hang out and chat a little bit there, and, not really that much since, even though we don't really live all that far apart. I'm like, you're straight shot up I-91 up into Massachusetts. So, yeah. I will. There's lots to talk about, and I know we only have you for maybe half an hour or so. So we'll get right into it. So, as I introduced you, you are in fact a PhD doctor, and you teach at UMASS Amherst, correct?
That's correct. Isenburg Business School.
Nice. And how long have you been doing that?
35 years.
Yeah.
It's been most people don't stay in jobs that long anymore, but Isenburg and academics, particularly business schools, are just a great umbrella. They want me to consult, to work with businesses, to write books, So exactly the lifestyle I would choose fits very well. And then of course I get all these great students. I had to calculate, I've had like 75,000 students over the years, and they're
Wow.
all out there doing everything from leading major companies to probably some are in prison. I don't know, but a wide range, and it's just fascinating to watch where they all end up, and
Yeah.
to influence them to, have the right mindset about things in as far as business goes and lean and all these topics when they're young.
Mhm.
So I'm not trying to undo somebody who says I've got 35 years experience in manufacturing and it's all doing it the wrong way. You can
Right.
just give it to them the right way, and they never know the wrong way. So.
Right. Yeah. They just, right. They don't know. And so I'm really, really excited. And I can't say thank you enough for joining us.
Pleasure.
I'm really excited to have you here because I think of any guests that we've had so far and will have, you have a very unique experience because for that very reason, you get folks when they're still very malleable and moldable. So like you said, there's no necessarily bad culture stuff that you have to overcome, which is like I'm a pure consultant. So I walk into clients and I never really know exactly what I'm going to come into. You get them when it's like, nope, forget all that stuff, guys. I'm going to teach you the right way to do it and head this way. And then, like you said, you get to see when they disperse and like see what happens from there. In addition to, but I still think you do some consulting as well. Is that right?
Oh yes, absolutely. And but to your point about students, another thing I've noticed, because they don't know the wrong way, they are in the last say decade, they're getting promoted very, very, very fast. I was just talking to somebody before we got on here, and she left. She's now 23 years old, and she's gone to work for Amazon, and she now has 270 reports. And she's 23 years old because she can make stuff happen, and she knows the levers to pull.
Right. So, and that's so that's kind of where I wanted to start because, I've been at this, well, I'm a degree mechanical engineer. So I was out in industry for a long time and I opened New England Lean about 8 years ago. But that's one of the struggles is, and that's the fight that I signed up for. So I'm not complaining, but in your case, so one of the things I hear and I see on social media and in the lean community is the inertia that we necessarily have to overcome sometimes. And I wanted to get your thoughts because a lot of folks, I'll say some folks, will point fingers at MBA programs and say, well, the MBA programs of the 80s and early 90s didn't really teach this, like the culture stuff, the EQ side. It was all make the numbers, KPIs, metrics, measure,
Right.
you get what you measure. So from your perspective, how, and maybe it's stuff you've done, Isenburg Business School has done, do you feel and see that changing? And what have you guys, are you purposely trying to change it?
It's ironic given how we met at a conference. I just gave a talk to the Northeast Shingo conference on why lean is struggling to spread outside of manufacturing. And it was actually a student of mine, an MBA student. I was saying, look, your parents have had terrible trouble with these theories. They haven't really been able to, do them except in very isolated spots. And they're very hard to do, but they are provably very powerful if you can do them. And the student stuck up her hand and said, if the theory is so hard to apply, maybe there's something wrong with the theory. And Bruce Hamilton called me that same day and said, would you give a talk to this year's Shingo conference? So I said, sure. And what do you want to talk about? Why lean is so hard. So I looked deeply into it. As you know, I regard myself as a student of Shingo. I spent a lot of time in Japan. There were sort of 6 of us back in the 1980s who were, and I'm the only one left now, who were kind of tooling around Japan, trying to understand what was going on. And I was sort of saying, what would Shingo say if he was alive today? And really, if you get down to the bottom of it, it's Daniel Kahneman's thesis about thinking fast and slow. People don't like to think. So people often say Henry Ford was the first lean guy, and he said thinking is very hard. They often say it comes from the Ford system. I agree. There's history.
Yeah.
But he said, thinking is hard, which is why nobody wants to do it. And basically what lean does is it forces you to upgrade your thinking about how things work operationally, mostly. And people don't like that. And it's hard. It's tough. So I see a lot of and it's also a system, and that's another place where we fall down. This is Jay Forrester's point for years. Humans don't naturally think in systems terms. We don't naturally think in process terms. And so unless you are deeply educated, so I don't just tell my students about this in one class. I spend 3 months so they see the whole, and then they never go back, you know. So there's a lot to the question that you asked. We also talk a lot about, you brought up, you know, financials and cost benefit analysis, and I tell them that you know, cost benefit analysis is really the enemy of lean. It is I don't know if you know this, but Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winning economist, wrote an article on why cost benefit analysis is stupid, and because it's very short-sighted. Even the guy who invented it, it was a Frenchman, said, be very careful with this. It's a very limited tool. You only see part of the whole. And I had a lean sensei say to me that, you know, when you look at things through cost terms, it's like you're only using 1 sense. But when you go to Gemba and you really drink in the problem and you think deeply, you're using all 5 senses. And so you're going to make much better decisions and do much better. But that's an educational thing. It's not a 1 or 2 day training thing.
Yep. Hey, I'm a big fan of Stephen Dubner. So he's the Freakonomics guy, and he's got a Freakonomics radio podcast. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just listening to, I think it was last week's release, and he brought the cost benefit up. So I feel like there's some cracks in the foundation. Well, I shouldn't say foundation, but it feels like people are understanding that that's not the end all be all. You can't just sit and look at the spreadsheet and say, well, we have a payback period of less than 3 years, so it's a go, and it's more than 3 years, so it's a no-go, and that's the black and white of it, right? Because there's all this other stuff.
Well, there's also, you're absolutely right. There's also another problem with cost benefit analysis, which is it's notoriously inaccurate. So I have another article buried somewhere back there that found that it studied hundreds of cost benefit analyses and found that on average they were off by 80% from the actual, because the cost benefit analysis is a prediction. So you can always go back and see, you know, it's saying if you do this is what your bottom line is going to change by, presumably. So it's off by an average of 80%, frequently off by more than 100%, meaning that when it tells you to do something, you should not do it. And vice versa. So if I came to you as a consultant and said, I've got this great tool, it's, you know, plus or minus 80%, frequently totally wrong, you'd say, you know, go away. But for some reason, we've become very enamored of that. And there's a lot of people now saying that's a very, very limited tool. I mean, it also has a very short period, so you can't see long term with it. So there's lots of things which kill you in the short term, but give you 10 times the profits in the long term and all that. So it's not the right tool if you're doing something long term, continuous improvement.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's almost you know, I've had some conversations about, can you really do lean in a large publicly traded organization, you know, and because and I don't think it's impossible. Like physically, of course you can. It's just a matter of, does the culture allow for it to happen? Because, you know, again, and I've worked for publicly traded companies, so there is a lot of pressure to make the numbers. It's every quarter, you know, make the month, make the quarter. At a aerospace company that I won't name that I did work at, we used to track cost per delivered hour. So we would make a part, and every time, you know, based on the router steps and cycle times, we would earn a certain amount of hours, right? And it was engineering dependent, right? So whenever the department would, air quotes, deliver that part to the next department, they would earn those hours. So that's how the business managers would manage. So I actually graphed the cost per delivered hour every day for like 4 months. And Alan, it was almost a perfect sawtooth, right? So it was you know, we talk hockey sticks. This was like last week of the month. It was just, everybody's just piling stuff on and pushing stuff out. The first week of the next month, it was not like, it was the most boring week of the month because nobody had anything to do, because we completely drained all the raw material and everything else. So you see this thing doing this, and it's the exact opposite of what you and I would do, which is level load. And, you know, there is no end of the month and all that kind of fun stuff.
Now, I would point out that the leanest companies in the world are all publicly traded.
Hmm.
Toyota is, you can buy its stock,
Yep.
and Inditech, Zara is publicly traded. Danaher, which many people say was the greatest stock to own of all time, is publicly traded. The question to me is, so once you've sort of trained your stockholders that management knows what it's doing, and they back off and let you do the long-term stuff. But I've certainly, to your point, had plenty of instances where I won't name this company, but it's a very large pharmaceutical company. They said, we want you to come in and do 3 days of training for our senior leadership team, global company, and we want to see lean results by the end of the summer. Mm-hmm. And I had to go in May. And I said, 3 months, the leadership team for 3 days, it's just not happening. Unless you guys really go back to school, really learn this stuff as a system. I don't, all that I could make some money off you, but then you're just going to yell at me in 3 months. So I can see that one coming. That's pretty short term. So it's a re-education, and until the management has earned itself a bit of space. But you do have to ask, why does Walmart? Many people say that's very lean. Richard Schoenberger wrote the book that said Walmart was leaner than Toyota. Mm-hmm. It's publicly traded, but people kind of know they're good at reducing costs. Let them do their thing. You may disagree with other things they do, but sure, as far as managing costs, yeah, you go, guys. We trust you, and that gives them that latitude to do some long-term process system improvement things that aren't obvious to people looking for every dime every second.
Right. Yep. So yeah, and point taken. I mean, like I said, just because you're publicly traded, and you get several examples of, yeah, of course, like I said, you can, as long as the culture, right, can support it.
Singapore Airlines would be another one. Most profitable airline in the world, never lost money, very lean inside. Stuff they do behind the scenes is just amazing to save money.
Nice.
And it's long term. For example, they only use new aircraft. And you go, that's ridiculous. If I'm an American airline, I want to run 30-year-old aircraft and constantly have scheduling, maintenance is coming to check. And I had a plane pushback recently, and the pilot pushback, we were already going. He said, I'm sorry, we have a dead battery. I go, why didn't you figure that out before?
Yep.
So Singapore Airlines flies only new aircraft, so they never have delays because they never have problems. Their fuel efficiency is 35% better than the next best airline because everybody running old airplanes are their fuel inefficient. So they just continually make these longer term decisions and have these wonderful processes. And other airlines look at those, I won't name the ones I've talked to, and say, we can never do that. Well, they could, but if they tried to upgrade to that space, you're right, their shareholders would go crazy because they don't understand the trade-offs.
Yep, right. And then even if they did, right, say, if they don't have the proper infrastructure and everything else to support it, it will just be a cash drain. And then there will be, every Wall Street analyst will be like, see, told you should have sold the stock, and we shorted it, so we made a bunch of money. And all the hilarity ensues. So I'll talk. I want to jump over to your book, right? So the idea-driven organization is about 5 or 6 years old, I guess now.
Yeah, something like that. Yep.
So I'm a lean guy, right? I'm a lean believer and practitioner. So when you're talking about ideas and inputting idea systems, I'll throw you a grapefruit question. I'm going to assume you're not talking hanging a suggestion box on the wall.
Oh, absolutely not. And you probably don't want to get me started on those. But the average suggestion box gets 0.5 ideas per person per year and implements a third of those, which means that if you run one of those systems on your people, you'll get one good idea every 6 years. The modern systems, and there's quite a few in the New England area, run at 70, 80, 90 implemented ideas per person per year. And it's a key indicator for me whenever I work for Shingo Prizes or whoever wants me to look at their lean system. If I don't see a lot of ideas coming in from the front lines, they're not even close to doing lean, because it's a higher form of management. I think one of the big discoveries of lean was that most improvement is bottom up. If you actually look at some of the data we have in that book, but there's a lot of other data that 80% of your improvement potential is in the heads of your frontline people, or potentially in their heads, and only 20% is with management. So if you manage with spreadsheets and top down and CBA, you're using your 20% of your engine.
Mhm.
not the 80%. So suggestion systems are just an appalling way to tap that 80%. You're probably tapping less than 0.5% of it.
And I mean, I hate them too. For even before I was really introduced to lean, I was at a tier one automotive supplier, and we were launching a program for Toyota. So that's, I mean, short of hanging out with Shigeo Shingo or Taiichi Ono, we actually did have Shin Jiu-Jitsu come in. I didn't have any projects directly with them because I was too busy launching this program, but we certainly got to see a lot of the changes being made in the factory. So having this is in South Carolina. So I had never been in manufacturing before. So I didn't come with the baggage, I guess, of how we used to do it. So I had a little bit of an outsider's viewpoint as I'm watching people who've worked in this plant for, 20, 30 years go through this transformation. And then my take on it, looking at it from the outside and thinking that does make sense actually, so, and that was my first taste of it. And obviously I got hooked. That was 20 some odd years ago now. But the idea but that was the biggest thing. And I tried to carry that with me, which is, and I say it all the time, people who do the work know the best. And those are the people who run the machines, sit at their desks, right? Are like, it's like when we bring our car to the dealer. We know if it's making a funny noise. The technician can't tell. They'll take it for a test drive and be like, you're nuts. I don't know what you're talking about. But it's that key of they have to listen to us, just like managers have to listen to their people, right? I mean, that's kind of how it's supposed to work.
Oh, yeah. No, it's fascinating. So the innovation is profoundly bottom up. I did a very large study of global innovation, and something like 80% of these blockbuster innovations originated in a cubicle. And there's a saying in creativity, why is it that creativity always happens when the boss isn't looking? And same with frontline ideas. And there's lots of reasons for this. But mostly it's that managers see aggregate information like trends and, sales and things. And the frontline workers see the detail that's necessary to, find the improvements. But then, so they see things that management doesn't see. That's profoundly true. It's also that most of the improvements that you need to make are deeply buried in your processes. And when you make them, you do them because your frontline people are doing, it's also the type of suggestion they put in, which is that they're doing the work. So if I figure out, I don't know if you saw the Walmart's, there was a viral thing recently about in the Walmart annual meeting, they came out with a frontline worker who'd suggested a slightly different way to load a box. And because it was done on, 100,000 trucks every week and it saved 30 seconds per box, it was an $18 million idea because the processes by definition are what the workers are doing. So the managers aren't going to see that. But if I can save, Nissan used to say 0.6 of a second was an idea. So if I can save 5 seconds, but it's done 100,000 times a week, I've just found a full-time employee. So right. There's a whole lot of factors in there, but it's just profoundly true that if you want to run a lean organization, you have to be tapping those ideas. And there's a whole, as you saw in the book, there's a whole lot of things you need to know to do that because our instincts tell us the wrong things. It's a counterintuitive space if you're an old timer.
Now, do you think that that's the reason, so it's probably too long of a conversation today. But like one of my pet peeves is this whole lean failure rate thing, like people throw out 70, 90%, whatever it may be. But that aside, would you say that this is where a lot of, I don't even want to say transformations, but would you say that since it is counterintuitive, is this where people stub their toe a lot? Just not having a good system for allowing people on the floor to bring things forth?
Yeah, I wouldn't say stub their toe. I'd say shoot off their own foot.
Okay.
It's a big one. Absolutely. So the cycle that I see from failure, which I usually if people are properly trained and they know what they're doing, they can do lean well. But there's so many sort of, it's kind of commoditized now, 1-day seminars, 2-day seminars, and they don't kind of coach this deeper material about how you tap your frontline people. So the cycle usually goes, We try to do lean in a top-down fashion. Lean is profoundly a bottom-up thing. And we mandate all this stuff, and it becomes fill out my form my way or it's the wrong way. And instead of engaging people and teaching them how to come up with these ideas. So after a few months, they're not getting the results they were promised in the seminar, and they quit. Whereas if you are made, I was just on with another company before we talked, and I said, the whole thing about this is you got to go slow to go fast. This is a development thing. It's, you don't expect your kid to go to college and master calculus in 1 week. You say this takes some time, but at the end of it, you're going to be so much more successful for having gone through college and knowing all this material. So it's very much that I find myself saying, and Shingo used to say this a lot, go slow to go fast. He once bopped me on the head about something and told me about 2 different ways to proceed. And one was, you do more thinking and planning, and getting more input from people and and then it implements very quickly, versus the American way, which is at the time, which is where a few managers decide and then mandate and enforce and try to get buy-in. And it's a bad decision anyway because they didn't get any input. So it takes them 6 times longer to get half as much done. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're clear to people that you're going to be going slow to go fast, you're going to be developing your people, educating, you're doing things, but it's going to hit after 6 months, and then you'll never look back. We see the average productivity improvement in the United States has not changed in 250 years. It's 1 to 2.5%. That's about what top management steam engine is maxed out at. The organizations we work with are 12 to 17% productivity improvement per year, because they're they're doing it in the right way. So as long as you can get through that for early period and you understand why you're going slow to go fast, you'll do it. But most people don't seem to go there.
Yeah. So how do you get CEOs, owners to understand that concept?
Education. And the sad thing is, I'm basically optimistic for the world, but the sad thing is that management education has really dropped off. And we have business schools, but they, as you say, they tend to teach, a whole lot of crazy things. But if you look at corporations, I can remember the good old days, if you see my gray hair, when, companies would send a new supervisor would go away for 3 months of training, and now all that's just been gutted. So I meet increasingly, even CEOs who know very little about management. I'm working with a large company right now, and I should be a little careful here, who are CEO and CFO, and they used to work for a brand name consulting company.
Okay.
And they didn't know as much as some of my undergrads. Mm. The book Good to Great.
Oh, sure.
I reference that. What's that book? I never heard of it. It's like, how are you running a major company and you haven't heard of Good to Great? Come on. You're going to be missing a lot of things. That was named the best management book ever written by.
It's on my shelf back here somewhere.
And so you should know that. How is it that my 19-year-old co-eds know that book and you don't? And right. So they do a lot of they spend their energies doing the wrong things. They don't know what levers to pull. So we end up with good is the enemy of great. Book that book.
That's a bit. I don't know if I even had thought of that, but you're right. I was on a call recently. We were chatting about what our kids are going to do because of COVID. Like I have a high schooler and a middle schooler, and we're going to do a hybrid thing. So we're just kind of chatting about that. And we have friends of ours whose children are going to be freshmen in college. Some have gone on site so far. Some aren't going until maybe January, but it's kind of a wait and see. And then there's a bunch of hybrids and all this kind of stuff. But what's interesting is, you're right. I think you make a valid point here. We tend to treat education as the first 18, 21 years of our lives. Then we go to work, and then we just work until 65, right. 70 years old. But where's the learning that's in between there?
It's not happening. And particularly with Lean, I forgot, I am technically a member of it, but there's a group of trying to do Lean in academia. Maybe you can help me here. I went to their conference last year. So nationally, all educators who were teaching Lean in undergrad and grad school. And it was a nice effort by the Shingo Institute to say, we gotta hit them young. And guess how many people came from across the whole United States?
20.
That's a little optimistic. It was actually, I think, 12.
Oof.
And so it's not being taught in business schools at all.
Mm.
And then, of course, you go out and the people running companies now got their education in the 90s. So, and they haven't upgraded their skills. And it does take a little while. And there's no program that's really doing it right to me. I would want to have them read some books, attend some presentations, try some things, and then go see about 5 really great lean companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, I'm not going back. This is better than that. But they never get that chance. So they go with what's, and of course, the whole, I'm not the first person to say this, but, we have a long history of top-down management. And this is a profoundly bottom-up. All the new management technologies coming in are all bottom-up. Right. That's where the action is. And we didn't know that. We had all kinds of, the early thinkers in our field all said, management's about control. Organizations are chaotic. We have to time everybody and process everybody. And so it was all about how to get top down, and they didn't realize what they were missing bottom up. And in the innovation space, there's a guy called Edmund Thorpe, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics. He wrote a book called Mass Flourishing. If you think frontline employees are ignored in this country, and that's a problem around the world, I would say, innovation is dropping off at a dramatic rate because innovation is also profoundly bottom up. And everybody's trying to put controls on it and accounting and costs and control it. So it's dying. You can actually track it's dying off. We're not innovating at the same rate we used to for that same reason. We just bottom up. You asked about to start when we started talking, we profoundly don't want to listen to the people beneath us.
Right. And I have yet to be able to put my finger on exactly why. And when I tell you, if I've gotten yelled at by, one VP or director or president, when I was in industry, I've gotten yelled at 100 for stupid things. Maybe I deserved it a couple of times, but, a lot of times it was, me and 5 or 6 other people. And, we just all we all get yelled at because as a team, we're not performing. And it's like, wait, hang on a second.
The people who have the best answer to that one are the crowd at Stanford, if you're familiar with the Stanford Prison Experiment. And after that was kind of an interesting sort of fiasco, but it opened a lot of interesting issues. And there's a group at Stanford that is specialized in studying power. It's in business school, and how power affects your thinking. Power has an enormously negative effect on your cognitive ability. And the old saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep. As
you rise up the organization, you get more of this stuff called power, and it does a number on you. It's just like a drug. And unless you have mechanisms in the organization that can mitigate that, and people are trained to watch out for it, it's no accident that these studies are finding things like, if you ever wondered why Good to Great said the most important thing to look for in leaders is humility? It's like, let's get this power thing out of here, because it means you think you know best. You don't listen to others. You shortcut, you stereotype, all well documented.
Yeah.
So that, again, it's this,
I'll have to, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've only heard the Reader's Digest version of the Stanford Prison. So basically, and please jump in if I butcher this, but basically it was a psychological test of a bunch of college kids, and they put some of them in jail and some they turned as prison guards. And I think they wanted to run it for a month, and they had to shut it down after like a week and a half because it got so, and actually I think there's kids that were the prisoners who had legitimate PTSD like well into their lives just based on this. Is that kind of how it went down?
Yeah, you would have passed a quiz question on it there.
Okay, all right.
But there would have been some red marks along the way.
Well, yeah. Like I said, I still have to pull up. I want to read the whole thing so I can. But
there's a great book. It's called is it the Lucifer Effect? Or
that sounds right.
Yeah, and it just sort of describes, because exactly the same thing happened in it. The people who should have been punished at Abu Ghraib were not anybody on site. It was the generals who created that situation, because Philip Zimbardo said, that's the situation. It's the system. It's what Deming says. It's the system, not the people. Anybody would have gone crazy. I'm not excusing their behavior, but So the prison experiment was incredibly realistic. They involved the Palo Alto police, and you signed up. Most of the people were all paid. They were doing it for the money, and they were told they'd be involved in a 6-week study, and I think they got $50 a day, and all food and everything paid for, and that was it. And one morning they arrested 20, and it was a real police cars pulled up. You were cuffed. You're under arrest. And they were blindfolded, taken into this prison, which was, in fact, in the basement of the psychology department. This would never pass muster today through all the books that we have to go through now. And then 20 other people were told, okay, here's your new job. You're the guards, and these are prisoners. And they're going, and this is where the study sort of went awry. They skewed the guards. It's not regarded as an accurate study. It's thought-provoking, not accurate anymore. They skewed the guards by saying, these people will misbehave. You're going to have to be tough on them. And so the guards started beating them and making them strip and depriving them of food and putting them in solitary. And it got pretty bad. It was supposed to last 6 weeks. It ended after 3 days. I mean, when you read the actual book of it, it's hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, more stuff going wrong. And they were sitting outside behind their one-way mirror. Luckily, they videotaped the whole thing. So they were sitting behind their one-way mirror going, should we pull the button? Should we pull the cord on this thing now or wait another 2 hours? And after 3 hours, I think it was Philip Zimbardi's wife who came in and said, you got to stop this. This is out of control.
Wow.
And then, but that whole thing spawned this group at Stanford that said, let's study. He was in the psych department. Let's study Zimbardo. I'm sorry, I got his name. Philip Zimbardo. You've got to study this in the business context. And there you have, I mean, you've seen all these, crazy excesses that happen when CEOs of Bendix and other places get too much money and power. They just, it's like you've given them an LSD.
Yeah. We had one at a place I worked who got, well, I think officially he retired or whatever, but basically everybody knew what happened was he got fired because he was taking the corporate jet over to China to purchase his 4th yacht.
Oh, yes. That's right. Yep.
So, and he got found out finally. And it's like, well, for years this has been going on. And it was only we caught him on the 4th yacht that he bought. So it's like,
right.
In the meanwhile, you're just laid off 200 engineers because we need to make the quarterly, profits for Wall Street. So that's great.
Yes. So I work with a large insurance company, and I remember the CFO drawing me aside and saying, these guys maintain these executive jets on 2-hour call out, and they hardly ever use them. I said, well, why do they keep them there when they're laying people off? So it's just, that's the way senior executives, that they just think they're worth it. So you give people a little power, they go nuts.
Yeah.
And so you have to counter that. And there are ways to do that, and companies that do it somehow.
All right. So, Alan, I want to take a little bit of a break from a formal interview, and there's a part of the podcast I like to call the wicked fun part. Because we are, right? We're New Englanders, so right? So if you're up for it, I get some kind of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay, I'll do my best.
All right. What keeps you up at night?
Frankly, that's when I do my best work. If I'm usually up an hour in the middle of the night, like 2 to 3 o'clock. I sleep 8 hours, and I'm very stable, no insomnia. But that's when I figure out stuff. I've learned in my career to work with my subconscious. So when I wake up, I don't go, oh my gosh, I got to get up at 6 or whatever. I got to get back to sleep. I go, oh, why did I think of that? And I'm putting together, it's a new book, and I've got a number of major projects underway that I'm usually hired because I figure stuff out. It's not to do canned stuff, So I'm going, here's somebody I could talk to, or here's a new approach. And the only thing I don't do that I'm supposed to do to be absolutely perfect goody-goody researcher is to wake up and hit the light and write it down.
Yeah. Right.
I have a way of drilling with my memory. I can usually retain 80%. Then I go back to sleep.
Nice.
That's probably a boring answer to.
No, not at all. It's
really
anything. It's pretty much anything goes.
Okay.
All right. Here. What's your favorite song and why?
A lot of them. I suppose I've been recently. I grew up in Scotland, and I went to Cambridge University, and right after the Monty Python crowd was there, and Beyond the Fringe, and so I've just been recently rereading Eric Idle's biography. Not reading for the first time Eric Idle's biography, and John Cleese, and these guys who are just amazing people. And so I guess right now it would be Always Look on the Bright Side of Life.
Nice. That's a good one.
Which I hadn't realized. It was the story of how that was put. That was, he wrote that song in 2 hours, beginning to end. It was just done.
Did not know.
It was so they needed something to change the mood of the crucifixion scene in whatever it was called. What was their
Search
movie?
for the Holy Grail.
Life of Brian.
Life of Brian. Okay.
Yeah. So he wrote that song, and now that's the most popular song in funerals worldwide.
Wow.
If you look at what people play at funerals, they play that song, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. It does make you smile. It's very clever.
Interesting. Stuff I never knew. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
No. I nearly went into the Army, and then I guess it would be a commercial airline pilot. I did a lot of flying, and I had my instrument rating. I used to fly around. New England is a really interesting place to fly because of icing and thunder. It's not like everybody goes. It's interesting to me that everybody goes to Florida. No offense to Florida, to learn how to fly because it's all blue skies and it's nice and weather's beautiful. But you don't get any experience to going through hairy weather, which is where I found the fun. So I used to go a lot. I used to work a lot in Singapore, and I would be on that longest flight in the world, which they stopped and then restarted. It was 19 and a half hours. And I used to watch the captain getting on board, and I'm going, I'm in this guy's hands for 19 and a half hours. We're going down the coast of Russia, where they shot down a Korean airliner two times. And then they, I'm going right by North Korea and however that geography works in China. And if this guy kind of, doesn't navigate right and he's got weather, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. And so I'm relying on this man's skills. And it's like this game of, it's a high stakes game of, you've got to be on the ball. And I always loved to fly. And I often thought, well, maybe I wouldn't want to be one of these people who's doing Albany to New York and back again in a loud turboprop. But the big long-range navigational stuff is super challenging and interesting, and that always fascinated me.
All right. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, boy. I'm going to say the ocean, crashing waves. The best you talked about what keeps me up at night. The best I've ever slept was when we were in the Cook Islands in the South Pacific. And we were in a room with it was a reef, so we didn't have to worry about tsunamis, but huge crashing waves all night with a gentle breeze. And if I ever, like Robert Louis Stevenson retired there, I would probably go and, get an office there and just live by the ocean. I find it profoundly relaxing. And people who live from the ocean, like the Cook Islanders, have a different level of understanding of life. I mean, it's not necessarily better or worse, but it's just a different way of being. So I enjoy it.
Nice. Thank you. So we only have just a few minutes left. So I know before we hopped on, you mentioned that, so you're working on yet another new book. And it's going to be out maybe you think a year or two, or a year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half, probably. It's something that'll be in the bookstores. So we were in our second draft. Okay. And we got some work still to do.
Okay. Yeah. Any teasers about what it might be about?
Well, we, after the book that you held up there, Idea Driven Organization came out, we started to get a lot of calls from governments saying, how can we become, really good at what we do? And so we started through our network of connections, we started saying, well, do you know of any government organizations that have successfully lean transformed or transformed performance, not necessarily using all the lean concepts? And we didn't get a lot of stuff back until maybe 2015 when we started finding, literally we're telling in this book of government organizations from departments to entire states that are now operating more efficiently than the best private sector companies I'm aware of. And you say, wow, government inefficiency has been almost a cliche all our lives. What So what changed? And this is a study of and an explanation of why these forces have changed. It's sort of an emerging movement, and we feel we trapped it very early. We looked for it a few years before it actually started, and then it started, and we started finding just these amazing examples of how it's a different problem than manufacturing or business. But government can transform and there have been lots of studies like reinventing the government, and none of those historically ever had any impact. They were all kind of heavy, top down, let's change everything at once. And so what happened to cause these, and these are in many countries, there's some government organizations that are just doing incredibly good jobs for their citizens. So it's a completely apolitical book, because whatever your politics, we need a fire department, we need, police and whatever. And so you agree on, here's what we're going to do. And now you say, let's do it in the most efficient possible way with the best possible, responsiveness. And that state of the art there is frightening that most people are unaware of it. And it's coming. It's really coming.
Good. Because let's face facts here, especially here in the United States. We need the help, and especially in government. I mean, if anybody's tried to pull a building permit or anything, it's just like, it's painful. And it's something that should be so simple.
Yeah, I just read that, what is it now in the United States, you can set up a business in 8 days. And this is one of the world's, well, if you go to Singapore, it's 4 hours.
Yeah, right.
And their growth rate, they were moaning last year when their growth rate dropped from 17% to 15%. And we're politicians saying, you got 2%. No, I got 3%.
Right. Yeah.
I get excited about numbers over 10%.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Alan, I know you gotta run. But I just wanted to say thank you again for spending this time with us. And so before I let you go, so I do want to say also thank you, because so we're going to do a giveaway for all the podcast listeners and anyone watching on YouTube when we post this. So you're going to win this exact book. Thank you to Mr. Alan Robinson for that. So I will post in the show notes all the terms and conditions and how to enter and all that fun stuff. So everybody who's listening, thank you. So part of the deal is you're going to have to share the podcast. And I think I want us to use the hashtag NEideas. So that's N is new, E is in England, and ideas. So, and again, I'll put it in the show notes so you use it. But again, Alan, thank you very much. I can't wait till your new book comes out. So I'll get on Amazon right now. I'll get on the wait list for it.
I can't either.
I mean, God bless you. So that'll be what, number 13 or 14?
Probably number 14. I've lost count, but somewhere in there,
yeah. It's I co-wrote one, and that was that was hard enough. So I can't even imagine.
Hard work. It doesn't get any easier either.
No. All right, Alan. I will let you go, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, everyone. It's Paul. Before I let you go, I just want to say thanks for listening. I hope you found the podcast to be both entertaining and educational, as that's really what our goal is with it. If you did like it, please give us a review and a subscribe. The more folks who do this, the more the algorithms like us, so the more people will be able to find us. I also want to give special shout outs to Emma Critchley for her video and audio editing abilities, which quite frankly are way beyond mine, as well as Jeremy Grant and the team at the Timber Cross for their creative genius. I appreciate you all. I invite you to connect with us as well. We're all over social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, so we should be pretty easy to find. We share a lot of content that is much like what we talk about on the podcast, so it may be of interest to give us a follow. You can also find us online at newenglandlean.com. That's our website, and it outlines all the services we provide, things we do, customer testimonials, case studies, white papers, as well as being our main conduit for story sharing about all things that are lean, quality, and culture change focused. So check us out there as well. Finally, if you have any thoughts about the podcast, things you'd like us to discuss, things you'd like us to change, or if you want to be a guest or know somebody who would be, please email us at podcast@newenglandlean.com. We're always trying to improve and welcome any feedback. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, make it a wonderful week.